Okay, we're back. This is Augsburg Confession, Article 8. New video. Okay, so Article 8, what the church is. These are the Bible verses on which Augsburg, actually, here's a typo. Augsburg 8, there we go, is based. Here, and please read them ahead of time. Okay, so let's look at the note. This article elaborates on Article 7. So it's basically looking at the previous article and explaining it a bit deeper, and makes it clear that the church consists only of believers in Christ, those made holy by his mercy. So we have to be precise here. It's a little bit tricky. Hypocrites are not in this sense any part of the church. One may think of the term church. Let me just highlight this. The term church in a broad and in a narrow sense. The church, broadly speaking, is all those who assemble around word and sacrament. So those are all the people that you see in church whenever it is, Saturday, Sunday, Friday, right? So, narrowly speaking, the church encompasses only believers. There are not two churches, one visible and one visible. So this is important. There are not two churches. There's only one church. Rather, we understand that here on earth, the church is hidden. So, because faith or spiritual life is hidden with Christ in God, Colossians 3. The hidden church, now this is a wonderful definition. This hidden church, the one you cannot see, has public, visible marks. The hidden church has visible marks by which it is recognized, you can see, with absolute certainty. And that is Christ's gospel and his sacraments. In other words, you can hear the gospel, you are saved by faith in Jesus Christ, and you can recognize, you can see the sacraments, baptism, the Lord's Supper, purely preached and administered. That's what we saw earlier. So these abbreviations again, this is AP is the apology of the Augsburg Confession, which is a so-called defense of the Augsburg Confession that will come later in the Book of Concord. And then SA is the small called Articles. That is another document in the Book of Concord, the small called Articles written by Luther, where he also kind of summarizes what it means to be Lutheran. So it's, if you will, it's an additional document, a little bit like the Augsburg Confession, written 7 years later in 1537, not by Melanchthon, but by Luther. But the purpose is the same, to summarize what we evangelical Lutherans are about. And all of that is contained in the Book of Concord, right? Who knows? Someday we might have video classes on those other documents too. Right now, we still have to deal with the 28 articles of the Augsburg Confession, and that'll give us enough to do for a while. Okay, here's the actual text. Strictly speaking, the church is the congregation of saints and true believers. So that would be the narrow sense. However, because many hypocrites and evil persons are mingled within them in this life, and look at these Bible verses, those are the ones, and it's mentioned here too, Matthew 13, that those are Bible verses in which Jesus explains how basically the weeds grow alongside the wheat. And in this case, Jesus can see the difference between the two, who is a real believer and who not. But we cannot see it. They look like regular people in the pew. Now, to be fair, I would think that most persons in the church the little old lady sitting next to you, and then the young pious man sitting next to you. Those are solid believers. However, it is not impossible that there might be spies, spies mingled in your congregation. And those of you who live in or who come from countries where the church is persecuted, maybe you can relate to this. It may be possible that there are that the Sepah, the Iranian IRGC, some guy could be pretending to be a Christian, and so he's in there in your congregation. He's sitting there. He's listening. He might even be taking communion. Um, he might even, this is really scary, he might even be baptized, and it could all be a fake, but he's just there to spy on you and to report to the enemy, right? So, but we can't see this, you and I as human beings. Jesus can see it, right? So that's what they mean by many hypocrites and evil persons are mingled with them. So, because this is so, it is lawful. What he means here is permissible to use sacraments administered by evil men. According to the saying of Christ, the scribes and the Pharisees, of course, who were enemies of Jesus, sit on Moses' seat. In other words, they have important positions in the religion. So you might stumble over this. This might be you might say, "What's that?" I'll explain it in a minute. Both the sacraments and word are effective because of Christ's institution and command, even if they are administered by evil men. I'll give you an example in a minute, and you'll understand it better. Our churches, Lutheran churches, condemn the Donatists and others like them who deny that it is lawful to use the ministry of evil men in the church, and who think that the ministry of evil men is not useful and is ineffective. So, they're basically saying that it is, if someone is a fake Christian, that a baptism would not be valid. That's basically what they're saying. Who are the Donatists? It's, if you have this whole Book of Concord, there are footnotes at the end, or actually there's a glossary at the end. I put this in a footnote here for you. Donatists, 4th century AD, obviously, that means they taught or believed that to be persecuted was a mark of the church. Well, that's actually not incorrect. Sacraments administered by a person deserving excommunication, they said, were invalid, didn't count. And a church failing to excommunicate such leaders ceased to be the true church. In other words, if you had a fake pastor or priest, a fake Christian, that here, for example, the baptism was invalid. So, and we disagree with these Donatists. So again, I'll explain that. And Donatists held that only they were the true church. This is something we actually hear a lot, especially in the United States. There are many weird groups and sects and so on that say that only they are the true church and everyone else, they're all fakes. This is an old problem, and we still deal with it today. Okay, so let me give you an example. So when I received my first call, I was obviously inexperienced, and I received a call as an associate pastor. Associate pastor is if you will, like a junior pastor, right? And there was a senior pastor as well. And we got along very well as humans, as people. In fact, I learned a lot about beer from him, so that was a good thing. However, so I had been there not even 18 months when there was a scandal. He was involved in a huge scandal and he had to leave. And he left there was there were several weeks of arguments and discussions with the church and with him and whatnot. And I was standing there watching this, and I thought, "Ugh, so what's going to happen?" So, and then from one Sunday to the next, he left. He had to go. So I was left there as a still a younger guy, junior pastor. All of a sudden, I was the only pastor. So this was a learning curve for me. This was difficult. In retrospect, it was good for me. I learned more in that stressful time than I would have learned otherwise. But for that pastor, of course, it was a bad deal. And for the congregation, it was a really bad deal. And as you might imagine, there were two camps, two groups within the church. Some people said, well, we need to forgive him his deal, even though it was publicly known what the scandal was. Others said, no, no way, he has to go. So my actually my well his supervisor, the district, actually, the circuit visitor, it's called the circuit visitor. So you have the pastors, then at least in the LCMS, above that you have the circuit visitor. He's kind of responsible for, say, maybe 8 or 10 pastors in his area. And above that you have the district president, and above that then you have the president of the church, right? And in Europe, that president of the church should be called a bishop. But for historic reasons, we don't use the term bishop in the LCMS. So anyway, so I was the bottom guy, and then the circuit visitor above me and above the senior pastor, who of course was gone now. So the first thing he said to me, he said, you need to teach the congregation Augsburg VIII, Augsburg VIII. And which is this again? It is lawful to use sacraments administered by evil men. What's that? So here's the background. There were people in the congregation who were saying, Pastor so-and-so is gone now. Oh, he's done this evil thing. He's broken this commandment. But he baptized my granddaughter. So is that baptism still good or not? Because obviously he was a bad pastor. But what about my granddaughter and the baptism? So this is saying correctly that because of Christ's institution and command, it is still effective even if administered by evil men. Why is the baptism still good? Because the pastor is only a mouthpiece. He's only, if you will, a loudspeaker for Christ, right? So I have to go to the other room now, but think of one of these wireless loudspeakers, right? These or whatever they're called. You know what I mean? These boxes. So they simply have the sound that comes out. The music or whatever it is comes from the phone, right? I don't know why it's always blurry here. Oh no, so now you can see it. So here's my phone, right? So this is where the music comes from, right? The loudspeaker is just the sounds coming out of it, right? So you can exchange that loudspeaker. You can connect it to a different loudspeaker. You can connect it to your headphones or to your ear pods or any of that. So you can exchange that. That's okay. The phone, where the music comes from, that's important. So the phone, of course, would be Jesus. The loudspeakers, the headphones, that would be us, pastors, right? So in other words, the forgiveness that this man spoke every Sunday, the Lord's body and blood that he shared, the baptisms that he administered, they were all still valid. So, in other words, that grandmother, she had nothing to fear. Her granddaughter was still baptized correctly, is still a child of God, etc. Right? So that is the importance of this Augsburg VIII, what the church is. And so I guess the main thing, so let me just underline it, I guess. The main thing is this, that if the pastor turns out to be a Well, if he falls from grace, let me put it that way. He wasn't an evil man. He stumbled, right? But nonetheless, he was no longer able to be a pastor. And so it is lawful to use the sacraments. That's what that means, right? I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, so these are the story here. This is the story, by the way, story of the pastor in Tulsa. And so in our live session, then you think about these things here. Obviously, well, you can think about this the story of the pastor in Tulsa, and you can think about it and ask questions about it. And so then we'll discuss it. Okay? So I hope this video was helpful for you. And don't forget to read the Bible verses ahead of time before you study this and reflect on it and pray on it. And I look forward to discussing this with you live. Okay? God bless you. Bye-bye.